Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek ladies, Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library. And we are back with Ladies Trek Library. I'm Kavura, and I'm here with Jen. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kavura. I'm happy to be back. It's been a while.
And I think it's great to be back, too. We took a long break. So now we have the Kobayashi Maru by Julia Ecklar. And I'll just read the back cover. A freak shuttlecraft accident, and suddenly Captain Kirk and most of his senior officers find themselves adrift in space, with no hope of rescue, no hope of repairing their craft or restoring communications, with nothing, in short, but time on their hands. Time enough for each to tell the story of the Kobayashi Maru, the Starfleet Academy test given to command cadets. Nominally a tactical exercise, the Kobayashi Maru is in fact a test of character revealed in the choices each man makes and does not make. Discover now how Starfleet Cadets Kirk, Chekov, Scotty, and Sulu each faced the Kobayashi Maru and became, in turn, Starfleet officers. So that's the summary, and I'm just checking. So this book was published in 1989, so it was, I just like to know that, okay, it was after Next Generation had started. Okay, so that's the general story of the book, and so there is it's a frame story where they're stranded in a shuttlecraft together, and they start telling what happened when they took this Kobayashi Maru test. And of course, our listeners probably know that test was first mentioned in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and they said that Kirk took it 3 times and that Spock never had it. So I guess that's why Spock is not telling his story in this book, because he never took that test. So Jen, what are your general feelings about the book as an intro?
So, I'll talk about just very briefly the frame story, which doesn't, there's not a lot of plot into that. So basically, Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, and Sulu and Chekov are stuck in a shuttlecraft that is, they've lost power, they may be hit by a meteor, and they're waiting for rescue, and they're kind of passing the time by telling their stories about the Kobayashi Maru. And so after each person tells their story, it kind of goes back to the frame story. I will say that I found the frame story to kind of be a distraction. It really didn't have a whole much, plot. We obviously knew that by the end of the book that they're going to be rescued because they have to return the characters. They couldn't have them all dying on the shuttlecraft. So it wasn't like you really, it wasn't. To me, that part, it kind of was a distraction. You're reading the stories in the past, and then it brings you back to the present, and you're like, oh, you kind of forgot. Oh, yeah, there's a frame story, and they're still on the shuttlecraft, and you kind of forget about it. So to me, that was kind of like filler. It really didn't bring much. But I guess, maybe there wasn't another way to frame 5 separate stories talking about something that happened in the past. I don't know. What did you think about that, the frame story?
Yeah, I thought the frame story was not as interesting, and but I do see why the author did it. It just seems like, well, you have the people telling their story, and what other reason are they going to have? It was probably better to have some kind of disaster in the frame story than to just have the people just talking over coffee. I guess that wouldn't have been as dramatic. But yeah, let's see, the most interesting parts of the frame story would probably be McCoy, because McCoy did not take this test. According to this book, he never heard of the test until they started talking about it, and then he got interested in it. So, maybe it was worth it just for McCoy's commentary, but that would be about it, I think.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like I said, maybe no other way that they could have brought the stories together, other than to have some kind of frame story where they're all just have the time to talk about their experiences. So,
So the first person to talk about how he did on the test was Kirk, and of course we know something about it from Wrath of Khan, because he said he took it 3 times, and the third time his solution was interesting. I think is what Spock said in Wrath of Khan. So here we find out what Kirk did, and this part made for a pretty good story.
yeah, I like the Kirk story. Of course, we know, we already knew going in that he was going to reprogram it. But I thought it was well done. Just gave you an idea of how driven Kirk was. That it really bothered him that he could not pass this test because he was kind of like a perfectionist, and he's spent late nights trying to figure this out. And even when some of his superiors kind of told him, hey, don't worry about it, he couldn't let it rest. So I enjoyed the Kirk frame story. I thought it was a good um, depiction of the scenario.
I kind of wondered if Kirk really would have been so driven. I mean, knowing that this is a test and it's just a test of character, and the fact that everyone fails, and that was his problem. He just felt like he had to find a way to win, to beat the computer. And I just wonder if, well, I guess that's the only way to, like, why would he have reprogrammed it if it wasn't something that was so meaningful to him, even though it didn't have to be. I mean, it's like, it's a computer test, and he did as well as everyone else, but I guess he just had to be better. And like what they said, he was the first one to pass it, or to reprogram, to think of it, to do it so that he actually could win. And it was funny the way he did it, where the Klingons. The Klingon in his program, the Klingon reaction was, "Oh, you're the Captain Kirk." That was funny. Like, yeah, when you're reading the book, you know that is kind of what's going to happen to Kirk later on. So it was funny to see that as a cadet, him getting that reaction.
Yeah, that was a bit arrogant because obviously he couldn't have known, what was
Right, yeah.
coming. So you do
But
get the
that's,
taste
yeah.
of him being arrogant, which I never felt like in the original series that he was, but I guess he was young, so.
Yeah. Which we can talk about, I guess. You want to go on, if we go on to Chekhov now. I mean the thing is, being younger when they were taking these tests, this is back in their cadet days, and you do see how different they were. Because I kind of thought Chekhov, like, would he, like, it's hard to believe he is the way he was at that time, especially during the time that happened after his test. With Chekhov's story, he blew up his ship in order to blow up the Klingon ship. That was his solution to the scenario, but that in his story was just a small part of it. Then they go on to another training exercise. So Chekov is telling the story of him having to be with these other cadets, and their assignment was just to live. And Chekov did it very strategically, but he also felt like he was competing with everyone else. And he seemed very arrogant in that. And I wasn't sure if that was really in character for Chekov. It just seemed like he just never seemed like that kind of person to me, that he would have been that way when he was a cadet.
I'm going to comment on that. There was one little thing I wanted to mention about Kirk, so I'm just going to say that, and then I'll move on to
Oh,
Chekov.
okay, yeah.
But there's a quote in here that I think kind of summarizes Kirk's feelings, which is Kirk is talking with Kostrov, who is an older student at the academy, and the student says, if you always win, someone else must lose. Isn't that so? And it says the thought bothered Kirk profoundly. He fingered the computer tape, suddenly embarrassed and frightened. to think that so much of his personal philosophy could be shattered with so simple a statement. It's not the same thing, he argued, albeit weakly. Losing and not winning aren't the same thing. I believe you can lose. I believe you can die. I don't believe there's such a thing as a situation that's impossible to win. So that kind of gives you some insight into that. So I thought that's kind of where you see the Kirk that you're going to see in the future. Maybe he doesn't think that he's always going to win, but he always thinks that there's a way out of a situation. So I thought that was
Yeah, that fit his character. That was good.
But moving on to Chekov. So the Chekov scenario bothered me. I think it was a great story. It's a story where, the cadets go to this space station and they have this competition, I guess you can say. If it was like a short story in an anthology, I think it would have been fantastic. I don't think it really fit in with the idea of the Kobayashi Maru, because it's not about the Kobayashi Maru. That already happens. Chekov basically says, he takes the test and he ends up blowing up his ship rather than letting the Klingons, have it. And everybody else seems to think he made a mistake in doing that. And that's really only a small part of the Chekov section. The main section is about this other training scenario that has nothing to do with the Kobayashi Maru, other than maybe it's like he's kind of acting out his feelings about what happened. So I kind of felt like, well, this section isn't really about the Kobayashi Maru. The other thing that really bothered me, I thought the story was great, but one thing, so from the beginning, they tell the cadets, hey, we're going to put you on a space station for, I think it was it 3 days?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
And the only thing you have to do is survive. You just have to live for 3 days. And when I read that, I thought, okay, maybe that's going to be hard because maybe there won't be, maybe you'll have, oh no, and they did say there was going to be, the rec hall was going to have food. And I thought, well, how hard could that be? You just have to stay alive, unless there's unless they're going to put robots or, some kind of holographic creatures that, in there, that didn't really exist in the original series timeline in there to fight you. It just seemed like, okay, you just have to kind of like hunker down for 3 days. Everyone seemed to interpret the scenario as meaning you have to be the only one to survive, even though they never said that. And so they all started like trying to kill each other. I mean, you weren't really killing each other. It was like I guess you could think of it like laser tag, right? They had weapons that would hit the person and then they'd be called out and they'd be removed from the scenario. So they were all like trying to eliminate each other. And I thought, this doesn't make sense. They didn't say to do that. And then at the end, when the scenario is over, they all kind of, the Starfleet instructors are like, hey, you all kind of lost because you all were killing each other. And when James Kirk did this scenario, he won because everyone survived. And I thought, that's kind of how I thought of it from the beginning. So I don't really understand how they all misinterpreted this scenario to mean you should all start killing each other. So I thought it was kind of weird. I don't know. What did you think?
Now, it's interesting that you saw through it that way because I didn't. But I wasn't sure what they were doing. It seemed like they were forming teams. They were kind of trying to work together, but then didn't mind turning against each other the way Chekov did. But no, I didn't really think it was strange that the way they acted. It was more. I just felt like this story ran long. I didn't really enjoy this one as much as the others. And you're right, it wasn't really about the Kobayashi Maru because that chapter just started out with saying, how he ended his Kobayashi Maru, and then it goes on to this other test. And I guess the writer did it just to have something different, to not have all the stories be about the same test. But this is the only one that wasn't really about that test. So it was showing a different part of Chekov, and I didn't really get like you did that it was that they were supposed to work together. So that is interesting that you saw through that. I do think it was like Chekhov was very clever. The way that he programmed the computer to only take orders in Russian, and it was a pretty good bet, and he was right that he was the only one there that could speak Russian. I thought that was very cool, and that was really smart of him.
Yeah,
And
oh, go ahead.
yeah, and just that and the fact that he was also thinking that and now at the time Chekhov took the test, Kirk was already a famous captain apparently. So well, yeah, because Chekhov wasn't on the original series until the second season, so the show had already started. But in this book, Chekhov is thinking like that Kirk is his idol, and he's thinking that Kirk would have been ashamed of him with his results of this test. I thought that part was interesting. Now go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, that was interesting too. I think he's kind of like a young guy who idolizes him. But yeah, there was a part of him in there that seemed very sort of arrogant in a way that didn't fit his personality that we know. But I guess that could be, attributed to, hey, sometimes when people are younger, they're arrogant, and he has since, gained more experience and um, grown as a person.
Yeah, it's like the author is trying to say this is where these people came from, and look how much they've changed. And we really didn't know as much about Chekhov. I mean, just from watching the original series up until he was like in Wrath of Khan when he was the first officer, he was really never used much. So in that way, you could think, yeah, he could have been like that since we don't really know how he was back then.
Yeah, that's true.
And moving on to Sulu's story. Now, I really thought that Sulu's story was the best one. I mean, it really it had more of a heart for me, and all the different parts of it were interesting. There were different things that happened with him. Uh, what do you think about Sulu's story?
Yeah, I liked it, and it had some really interesting stuff in it. So, Sulu is going off to command school at the same time is that he finds out that his great grandfather, who he's very close to, his great grandfather has cancer, and he's decided that he's going to stop his treatments. And so it's a real tough time for him to go away because he feels like his great grandfather's probably going to die, and he's going to not be there. So he's very kind of conflicted, and his mind is not totally in it, going off to command school. So it was nice to see that relationship between him and his great grandfather. And then there's some really interesting scenarios because I think this is the first book I've read where they, talked about it like a separate command school. So, he's already apparently finished the academy, and then there's like a separate command school that you go on to. And they're doing some of these, they have all these people doing different command scenarios and exercises, and some of them are pretty interesting.
That's what I thought. The one where Sulu was in the classroom and everybody like they're playing diplomacy. Basically, the instructor says each person is from a different planet, and someone or a different polity will say someone's the Federation, someone represents the Romulans, the Klingons, and other different, what you would call minor races, and Sulu was one of the minor ones, and it was all really interesting the way they played the parts. Oh, and the way Sulu had to pass notes, and one of his notes was, "I'm bored, let's start a war." It was hilarious. And now that I'm getting into role playing games, I thought that's exactly what this is. This is like a diplomatic role playing game. Each one is playing their own part, and they have to go by whatever rules are set for them. And it was really interesting. And then of course the part with Sulu's great grandfather, and I like the idea of making the Japanese cranes, like the paper origami, and if you fold a thousand paper cranes, a miracle will happen. And that was something that Sulu's great grandfather was doing for him, and all of that was just really interesting, and their relationship, and that's why I said this story really had a heart. It was about Sulu having to deal with command school and also dealing with with this person who had raised him that he loved.
Yeah, the only thing I questioned about that is, he obviously had this very close relationship with his great grandfather, but he doesn't mention his grandparents or his parents at all in there. So it's kind of like, I mean, I think there was like one sentence. So you're kind of like, well, where are they in this? He's going off to command school, and the only person that's really, there seeing him off is his great grandfather. So that was a little odd, but the diplomacy scenario that you mentioned was really kind of fascinating because he played this planet. He was supposed to be Maynok 3, and they could only communicate with the Federation through another planet. So he couldn't talk directly to the people he needed to talk to. He had to pass notes through a third party. And it was a very fascinating scenario because it's, really kind of gave them and the reader the idea of real life diplomacy when, things may seem like, oh, there's this really simple solution, but it's not going to be simple when you have all these different people who have different priorities and different ways of living and technologies involved, and people are imperfect, and it just makes everything so complicated.
It does, and it's just, yeah, so it gives you an idea of how hard diplomacy really is. I think that was the point. So
yeah, that was
yeah.
I really liked that section. It was really neat, and Sulu was very clever about how he did it. But he was unfortunate it had to be this planet that really couldn't make a lot of really do much, but he made the best of it.
He couldn't do much on his own. He could only do it by sending messages to other people, and they would ignore him. And he started throwing paper airplanes. And I thought that was neat, the idea that he was using paper airplanes, and then there was also the idea of his great grandfather making the paper cranes. Just an interesting way of, like, I don't know, I see a symmetry there, using paper in different ways, but now you see how paper is so necessary even in the 23rd century. Just a neat thought.
And I meant to look this up, but one of the things it says in the chapter is, in ancient Japan, cranes were revered for their grace and beauty. It was believed that if you folded 1,000 paper cranes while meditating, you could create a miracle. Is that true? I wonder. I meant to look that up and I forgot.
I did look it up, and what I found was that folding 1,000 paper cranes, you will be given a wish. And, instead of a miracle, you'll be given a wish, which is just about the same thing. And I assume it's different because there were probably different translations of it. So, yeah. So we'll say, yeah, the author probably did get that from something she read about Japan or something.
Yeah, but I did think this was a great chapter, and just that you really get to know more about Sulu and his background, which, obviously in the show really didn't know too much about him. Or his background. I mean, some of the novels have obviously fleshed him out, but this was nice.
Yeah, another good story to develop more about him. And so then we go on to Scotty, the last one that told his story about the Kobayashi Maru. And his was okay. What do you think?
It's interesting because you haven't read the book yet, but the next book that we're covering, The Best and the Brightest, has a storyline that is very similar, and I read these back to back, but kind of in the reverse. So in the Scotty story, Scotty is also going to command school because that is what is expected in his family. I guess there's a tradition of that in his family, even though he really wants to be an engineer. In the Best and the Brightest, we have the opposite. We have a character, Jamie, who is studying engineering because she comes from a family of engineers when she really wants to do something else. So it's kind of interesting that I read these back to back and they sort of had the same theme.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I mean, I guess maybe I've never been in that situation. I mean, I know there must be people who've experienced that. But I haven't. Like, I never had people in my family think, oh, I should do. I came from a family of my mother and father both worked in finance, and my brother does as well. But there was never any expectation from me that you have to go into that if that's not what you want to do. I always felt like, hey, well, you do what you want. So I don't know that I completely understand it because it was very clear to the instructors from the beginning that Scotty was an engineering genius, and that's really where he belonged. And he was just doing the command school from family pressure. And I don't know that I could buy into that much. I mean, if you recognize someone in your family is, a genius at one particular thing, I can't imagine thinking, oh, you can't do that. You got to do what we want you to do. So, but it wasn't a bad story. It wasn't my favorite one in there though.
Yeah, it does seem strange about wanting Scotty to do something else. And in some ways it does kind of, he could have done both because you do have people who, I mean, you have to start out somewhere. Like you can't be a captain right from the beginning. So even being an engineer and then moving up to captain could have been a path for him, but he really just wanted to be an engineer and not do anything else. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It is strange that he was doing it just because his family but then in the end it turns out, that he is going to do what he wants to do, which is the way it should be. Especially someone like Scotty when you know that that's his passion.
Right.
Yeah, but it was interesting the way he handled the test because, I love it because he gave an engineering solution for his test. So that was good. And it was neat that that the other person like spoke to him like on the computer anonymously and said, like, do you want to leave command school? And Scotty's, it just came up as a message on his computer, and so he's typing yes, and that was just neat too, like some anonymous person, even though you know who it was, but he was like, like, yeah, I'd like to leave command school and just be an engineer. That part was interesting, and another thing I just like have to say is that I think I always liked it on the original series when Scotty was in command. He just had a different vibe because he was more the Cisco type, like I'm not going to take it from anybody. I mean, he was like that. He was just the take no prisoners type of commander when he was in command of the Enterprise. So I always liked him. Oh, and I like his remark in this book too when they said, "Oh, Scotty, you mean you took the Kobayashi Maru?" And he said, "Well, no, they just let anybody command a ship." So, but yeah, and Scotty is funny too. So that's good. So, I mean, so his story was good, even though, I said Sulu was my favorite, but yeah, I think it was good.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. And it was interesting, his solution to the Kobayashi Maru was he gave a solution which he basically said, in theory, this solution has, theoretically it works, but it's never been able to work in real life scenario. So he gave kind of like a hypothetical solution, and that's when, the instructor in charge of that really kind of realized, hey, this is someone who's got a talent for engineering that probably needs to be doing engineering and not command. But you do get so it does give you an idea of that he did experience command school to a degree, because we do see in the original series on times when he, being number 3 in command, he has to take over when Kirk and Spock are off doing something else. He's in charge.
Yeah, and since you mentioned how it's similar to the other book, Best and Brightest, it also kind of reminded me of, Hamish the Hunter, the other book we reviewed. I mean, just because it has the frame story and it has the Sulu, Chekov, and Scotty in a different story, each one in their own story. So in some ways, it's similar just on the surface to that other book as well.
Yeah, there have been a number of Star Trek books that have had sort of a frame story. There's another one, and I don't know if it's one that you and I covered, because if we did, it was a while ago and I forgot, or just one that I read. But there was one with an older one with Captain Pike that had that frame story, and I'm totally blanking out on what it is.
Okay. It might have been The Rift, right? We did do that one.
That
The
may have.
Rift,
No,
but
it
yeah, by
wasn't the Rift.
Peter David.
It
Okay.
was the Rift the one that had Captain Pike and Gary.
Gary Mitchell?
Yeah, Gary Mitchell.
I think it did. You know, yeah, I've almost forgotten now.
That might have been it.
But I mean, but yeah, there were other frame stories, but I mean, ones that had these particular characters in a separate story, the way it had Sulu, Chekov, and Scotty. I mean, Homer's the Hunter also had that one, like, you know, a story that had those characters in a separate story, in their own story. So that one, in that way, this was like that, but the stories were completely different, and the purpose of the book was different. Except maybe that the purpose was to help develop these characters that we didn't know as much about.
Yeah, because Home as the Hunter was obviously not really real life. It was
Different
stories were fantasy kind of stories, like where Sulu gets transported back into feudal Japan and that kind of thing. But yeah, it does have sort of the same in that you get to learn more about them through their frame stories.
So that was the 4 stories that were part of this book. So what did you think of the book overall?
I liked the book. Like I said, I found the parts with the frame story to be a little slow, and I was kind of like, oh, we're back to this part again. Like, how long can this drag on? But overall, it was enjoyable to get to, these stories that the characters were telling about their past, and to get to know them more about what they were like before you get to see them on screen. So I would definitely recommend it. And interesting to note, this is the only Star Trek novel written by Julie Ecklar.
Yes, and I think she did a good job. I like the story too, and and like you said, it does feel like the frame story was more filler. I'm looking at the book; it's 254 pages. So it would have been a lot shorter without all the frame story, because it was in between all the other stories, and that part of it actually ran kind of long sometimes, the filler part. But overall, it was a good book, and I do recommend it. And it was interesting to see these characters in the past and see what they were like when they were younger. So I would say I'll give it 4 Quatloos. What do you say?
I would say I'd give it 3.5. Maybe just because I'm always more conservative on my I always hate to rank stuff high, and then I find something that's so much better, and I'm like, oh, but that one's better.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I liked it. Oh, and I did remember the other one that it reminded me of was similar Tales from the Captain's Table, which we did cover one story from that. Which is a similar format, which, in that one, it's the different captains all coming in and telling a story from their past. So it's kind of the same thing. We had crew members together all telling stories from their past. So
yeah, that's right. Okay.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.